By a show of fingers, who heard the news that a Minnesota state representative, Melissa Hortman, was assassinated over the weekend? Um, and that another Minnesota office holder, State Senator John Hoffman, was shot? Who heard it?
I heard. Mm.
All 7 of you heard that. Okay. So authorities have charged a man named Vance Bootler in the shootings. I'd like to know who thinks this is a random, one-off event by an individual, or whether it's part of a larger trend of political violence in the United States. Whether it's a random one-off event of an individual, or whether it's part of a larger trend of political violence in the United States. So by a show of fingers, who believes this is a one-off event by an individual? None of you do. And you all think this shooting is part of a larger trend of political violence that's normalizing political violence? All 7 of you do. Okay. So what evidence do you have that this is part of something larger? William, what evidence do you have it's part of something larger?
I would say history. If you look back at history at all our elections, you never had this kind of stuff going on. And if it did, it was very rare, very sporadic, and spread out over the history of our nation.
Okay, but what evidence do you have that this particular shooting is part of something larger? Explain that to me. I'm not fully understanding.
Well, because you have so many shootings. When you look at, let's take just the last 2 years, Trump gets an attempted assassination twice by 2 here in the country. Now we find out lately in the news that Iran tried to kill him twice, but those plots were foiled. Now you've got this random shooting that just recently happened that we're speaking about. There's really no set in time where a period of shootings that had a political tone to it were like that. Now you had assassination of presidents, and like I said, spread out over the history of our country, you've had that, but they weren't really concentrated in the way that they are now. Like it's almost random. We'll probably go a few more months and there possibly could be another one. So it seems to be that the climate in the country is so high that the probability of these things continuing may possibly happen. And there hasn't been an atmosphere like that in the history of our nation until now.
Okay. What other evidence do you folks have that this shooting is part of something larger?
I mean,
Jennifer,
forgive me if I'm wrong.
Justin, hang on a second. I want to hear from Jennifer.
I think I heard on the news that the shooter had in his vehicle like the different cards of different politicians. I don't think just in Minnesota. I think it was also like in Michigan, and I feel like maybe a few of the other surrounding states, but they were all Democrats.
Okay. What other evidence do you have that this is part of something larger?
For me, I've just personally heard about it. I've seen even magazine tabloid articles and everything else. FBI agents coming to arrest so-and-so. I think it was something to deal with in Minnesota a couple of years ago. Foiled assassination attempts down in Atlanta. What's her face during that whole debacle over the election and trying to whatever certified vote counts. There was a lot of things, or not a lot, but there were handfuls of things of politically motivated assassinations and hits and attempts. And I know United Healthcare CEO is not political, but it's in that direction that people are fed up taking it into their own hands and like, well, maybe you got to crack some eggs in order to make an omelet. Is this the only way? Nobody seems to be listening to me, so that's the direction that it seems to be going. Just explosive temper.
All right. Who do you think is mostly to blame for this pattern of shootings? Oscar, who do you think is mostly to blame for this pattern of shootings?
I don't know. I mean, there could be some people behind it, funding all this stuff. I'm not sure. I mean, I don't know what to believe there. but it's just been going on for a long time. I mean, I really don't know like who's to blame here. I don't know. Because Trump's Republican and then the shooter supposedly was Democrat and stuff. I mean, I don't know too much about it. So, why would a Democrat kill another Democrat? So I don't know.
By show of fingers, who believes that the shooter in Minnesota was a Democrat shooting other Democrats? Who believes that? None of you. Who in this group believes that that shooter was a Republican shooting at Democrats? So you guys have no clue what the political orientation was of the guy who did the shooting.
I think I've heard both. I've heard Democrat and I've heard Republican, but I'm not sure which one is correct.
Okay. So none of you have heard news reports saying that this guy was a conservative guy who voted for Trump. His friends attest to the fact that he was conservative. None of you have heard that?
I heard that he worked in the Waltz administration.
Yes, he was. So how many of you have heard that he was appointed by Waltz to be on some committee? By Governor Waltz. So 3 of you heard that. Okay, got it. Very quickly, what do you folks think could be done to prevent these shootings in the future? Hector?
I think if the media in general just toned down the rhetoric, I think that would help people get less emotional.
Okay.
I mean, calling Trump a Nazi makes him into an absolute evil. And what do you do with an absolute evil?
Got it. What else can be done? Thank you, Hector. Anything else?
Better prosecution. Because like the previous administration, nobody was getting arrested, or if they got arrested, they let them out in a couple of hours and then they're out there killing people. There was no, I think they did away with the bail to hold them for bail by
Okay.
Biden. So stricter laws.
Got it. By a show of fingers, who heard the news that a Minnesota state representative, Melissa Hortman, was assassinated over the weekend? And that another Minnesota office holder, State Senator John Hoffman, was shot? Who's heard that news? Marianne, you didn't hear it? No? Okay. 5 of you did. So authorities have charged a man named Vance Butler in the shootings. I'd like to know who thinks this is a random, one-off event by an individual, or whether it's part of a larger trend of political violence in the US. So by a show of fingers, who believes this is a one-off event by an individual? None of you do. And who thinks the shooting is part of a larger trend and climate that's normalizing political violence? 5 of you do. Marianne, which one do you think it is? You don't know. Okay.
I don't have enough information. Sorry, I didn't hear that in the news, so I don't know.
Okay. So for the 5 of you who say that it's part of a larger trend and climate, what evidence do you have that it's part of something larger? Zachary?
I mean, in 2017, I believe his name was Steve Scalise. He got a bullet. I mean, some representative from Arizona a while back, I believe during the Obama administration, was shot. There was an attempted assassination on Donald Trump. It does seem that political violence, unfortunately, is picking up.
Okay.
Also,
Yeah.
don't forget I believe it was the governor of Pennsylvania that the mansion was burnt down while his family was sleeping, or attempted to be burnt down.
Okay.
And the justices, Supreme Court justices that have had attempted murders. And I don't know if it would count, but the healthcare CEO that was murdered.
Okay. So, who is mostly to blame for this pattern of shootings? David?
Politicians and the media.
Which politicians?
Well, some that have this inflammatory rhetoric, specifically calling Trump a Nazi, and millions of people apparently believe that, and that's just so weird and strange that they can believe that. But that kind of rhetoric, yeah, is going to have consequences.
Okay. What else? Who else is to blame?
I think definitely the media, they are lionizing people that are doing acts of violence that are for their political views, and then criminalizing, things that are of the opposite. So I think it's definitely the media sowing that division between people in our country.
Okay. Besides
Yep.
politicians and the media, any other entities?
Now, I was just going to add, I do believe it is politicians because they encourage people that don't agree with your policies to be proactive and do something. But when they do something that is negative or killing or such, they don't condemn it. They just instead blame the other side and say, well, look what they led them to do.
Exactly.
Okay. Any of you think that President Trump does anything to inflame tensions in the country?
I
Sure
think he
thing.
did. I'm sorry. I was just going to add, I think he did the previous administration when he served, but I don't think he's doing it this administration.
Okay. So he was asked, I'm just curious about your reaction to this. He didn't call the governor of Minnesota after these assassinations took place, and instead actually insulted him. Who thinks it's proper for the president of the United States to not call the governor of a state where two of his state legislators are killed, and instead say negative things about that governor instead?
I don't find that to be acceptable. However, I believe Walz also was blaming Trump for it. So I wish Trump wasn't as petty sometimes and was the bigger person, but it goes both ways. So it's not surprising to me.
Okay. Couple other quick things. What do you think can be done to prevent these shootings going forward? Anybody have any ideas what could be done to prevent them?
Condemning them and putting people in jail and having hard consequences for doing bad things.
Okay.
I think part of what continues to fuel them is so much talk about them. We can find anything online, and someone who isn't right in the head starts reading about this man who did this and takes tips from them to how to go forward. I think that's a bad thing, that we don't condemn them and we continue to talk and talk and talk about them without condemning them.
Okay. Got it. Thank you. One last thing. This gentleman, Vance Boatler, who's been charged with these crimes. How many of you heard that I'm not asking you I'm not saying he is. How many of you heard news reporting that he was a Democrat or he is a Democrat? 2 of you, 3 of you. How many of you heard news that he's a Republican, a Trump voting Republican? 3 of you. So 3 of you have heard news that he's a Democrat, and you've also heard news that he's a Republican. Okay.
That's the news.
I've just heard,
Contradictory.
I haven't heard anything definitive as of yet. Everything I've
Exactly.
seen so far is hearsay, so I don't really have an opinion.
Okay. Got it.